comic book gurus.
So the question is, Superman's super good friend Jimmy Olsen super useless? Is this at times a freckled-faced cub reporter and at other times a ripped LeBron James-looking photojournalist really just dead weight in the world of the Man of Steel? Well, today, the comic book gurus rip the Band-Aid off and expose the pus-oozing truth. Do we need Jimmy Olsen? And of course, you know the gurus. We have Craig Lagans, we have Rockstar Rob, and we have Steph. Rob, let's talk to you first. James Gunn announcing his Jimmy Olsen. I kind of like the selection. I just don't know if I really care about Jimmy Olsen. Lead us through what's going on with James Gunn and his plans for Jimmy Olsen and all that stuff.
Well, there's not a lot of information out there on what they're doing with the movie. I mean, Gunn has released a few photographs of things, and I think the reason he released the information about Jimmy Olsen is because it was the anniversary of the character being created. But this guy, Skylar Gonzando, looks like a good Jimmy Olsen. I mean, but who cares? I just don't care if we have that character. He's useless. I think in the Snyderverse, they killed him in the first Batman versus Superman.
Here's the tweet you were talking about, Rob. Happy anniversary to Superman's pal Jimmy Olsen, who debuted on this day in 1941, although he did appear earlier as Office Boy in Action Comic 6, and they have a little bit of a tribute to that. So with that, I mean, we're hearing that there are a number of villains and a number of super-type entities in James Gunn's Superman. Can we assume, Rob, that there's not going to be a lot of real estate for Jimmy Olsen?
I think he'll have one or two spots, some nerdy comment, and I think that's going to be end of it. I think Gunn Gunn doing this, it was a nice way to put a little presence on the movie coming. It was, it was a good commercial for July 2025.
So let's go to you, Craig Lagans, and the history of Jimmy Olsen. Jimmy Olsen has been kind of this enigma for me. Take us through a little bit of the history of Jimmy Olsen, comic books and film.
Well, Jimmy Olsen first burst on the scene way back in 1938. This fresh, freckle-faced, bow-tied young man that we've come to know and love is actually more than 86 years old. Made his debut at Action Comics number 6 in 1938 as unnamed office boy, a role I'm very familiar with because I played in my own real life. But he didn't get a name until April of 1940 on the Superman radio show. Because believe it or not, kids, there was radio. And before there was television, radio was a cheap form of entertainment. And the Superman radio show first named him Jimmy Olsen in April of 1940. And
so it took to a radio show for him. His name did not exist in comic books at all until the radio show.
Exactly. And he became popular so much on the radio show because it couldn't just, they felt that it was, the radio show was just Superman, Lois, and then Perry White. So they had to create a fourth person for a dynamic and to give younger people something to listen to instead of these older people. So Jimmy Olsen was first named on the Superman radio show. And he didn't get his full name until Superman 13 in 1941, where he was actually called Jimmy Olsen. But that was the first time we saw the red hair, the bow tie, and the cardigan vest, which would be the staple. And for the next 83 and a half years, James Bartholomew Olsen has been linked to Superman and Lois like peanut butter has been linked to banana sandwiches.
Would you call him an integral character in the world of Superman? Would you call him an invaluable character in the world of Superman?
He's invaluable like lint, Steve, in that he's always there. He's always been there. And okay. Superman was popular. back in the golden age of comics that he even got his own comic book. Superman's pal Jimmy Olsen ran from 1954 to 1974.
So I see in this particular issue, he discovers creatine.
Yes. And he was the first beneficiary of the in the steroid era. But they tried to remake him over and over in so many different characters. Steve, in this cover, you see he was Turtle Man, but he was Elastalad. He was a werewolf. He was a Porcupine Man. They gave Jimmy Olsen many different powers or superpowers or abnormal powers to appeal to the Superman audience. But in that, at the end, he always remained Superman's pal, Jimmy Olsen.
Was this stuff really ever popular? I mean, or again, I'm trying to fix this character in the at a focal point in the lore of Superman, and again, he always seems very tangential. You know what I'm saying?
Yes, he was, but and the Superman when Superman burst on the scene, he was so popular that anyone connected with Superman got their own comic book. Lois Lane had her own comic book. You see, Jimmy Olsen had her own comic book. Krypto had his own comic book. And then when they ventured into movies and TV shows, Jimmy Olsen, who had been so solid in the radio and in comic books, when they had their TV series starring the great George Reeves, Jimmy Olsen was again a central character. The late great Jack Larson brought him to life on the small screen on TV, and he was an integral part of the Adventures of Superman in the late 50s. And Jack Larson pretty much is the epitome of Jimmy Olsen, and so much so that every iteration of Jimmy Olsen after that, in movies and in TV, were Jimmy Olsen. The great Mark McClure played him in the Superman movies from 1978 to 1983, alongside Christopher Reeve. Other than Christopher Reeve, he's the only one to appear in all four Superman 1, 2, 3, and Superman 4, The Quest for Peace, or The Quest for Box Office, as I called it. But Mark McClure also, and he was loved so much by Zack Snyder, he even got a role in Justice League as a cop.
Right, but, right. Is he not in the? Is he behind the counter when the Flash is going to the prison?
Yes.
Is that him? Yeah.
That is also him behind the counter. Yeah. So Mark McClure, obviously the biggest bow tie of all the Jimmy Olsens, but his template, is more iconic. And then we get to see the Jimmy Olsen and Lois and Clark, played by Justin Whalen. The Jimmy Clark in Smallville, you see with the red shirt, Aaron Ashmore is probably the most Jimmy Olsen-like, in that he always had a camera around his neck. It would be pretty hard now having a cell phone around their neck. And Sam Huntington in Superman Returns kind of channeled Aaron Ashmore and the Mark McClure version. But it wasn't until Supergirl that we got a Jimmy Olsen that was unlike any of the previous Jimmy Olsens. And I'm not talking about the obvious, that he's bald, is that this Jimmy Olsen, played by Mashad Brooks, wasn't a nerd. And that's
not only was he not a nerd, he was sort of a quasi-sex symbol. He was clearly a love interest for her. And I mean, at that point, why even call the character Jimmy Olsen?
The uproar over Mashad Brooks being Jimmy Olsen, Steve, was so unlike anything I've been as a comic book fan, because I thought, the uproar is going to be, of course, that they're having a problem with this Jimmy Olsen. But no, the problem they had with Mashad Brooks as Jimmy Olsen was that he was cool. He had swag. And if you watch, it's on the CW, so he had his shirt off for a lot of his episodes. And that, to a lot of hardcore comic book fans, pissed people off, because that's not the Jimmy Olsen. Jimmy Olsen's not supposed to be cool. He's not supposed to have swag.
It's completely revisionist. I thought the actor was very good. And then he became his own Iron Man-ish superhero.
Yeah, and that drove a wedge even more so into the Jimmy Olsen purists that didn't like what Mashad Brooks or the directors of Supergirl were doing with the Jimmy Olsen character. And to the point where when Michael Cassidy was cast as Jimmy Olsen in Batman vs. Superman, like Rob alluded to earlier, he was killed in the first 10 minutes. So they're proving a point that if you remember this scene from Batman versus Superman, we only saw his name on the screen in the computer readout, but Jimmy Olsen, like many of us, think that he was superfluous, not really needed.
So I adore this movie. I adore Batman v Superman. I adore the director's cut. I am a massive fanboy for Zack Snyder. I just love what the story is. I have to admit, it took me like 6 or 7 times before I realized this dude was Jimmy Olsen. And I'm like, oh, really? Okay. Let me ask you, Rob, in this case, but do you see one of these characters that might make a case for keeping Jimmy Olsen around? Or are they all just disposable?
I think the problem is that what does Jimmy Olsen stand for? I think he's supposed to represent the everybody, like the innocence of the world, that Superman's pal, and he sees the world through the innocent eyes of Jimmy Olsen. So he became really quirky, and then as history has gone on and these characters keep coming back, he just doesn't work now. And when you change him like they did in Supergirl, he doesn't stand for what he was supposed to stand for in the first place.
That's an interesting point. Steph, first off, Jimmy Olsen, yay or nay for you?
I mean, I was pretty much this week years old to even know who he was when we were going to do this episode. So I had to do a quick little search. And Mashad Brooks was the only one I've actually seen in Supergirl. So when I was reading that he was a super nerdy person, I was like, oh, this is pretty different than what I saw. But if people were so upset with how that actor portrayed that character, is it more upsetting for them to change the character or to just not have that character at all? Because if he's been a staple with Superman for so many years, are people going to be more upset that he's not even there, whether he's relevant or not? I'm a fan of sidekicks. I like Ethel to Lucy. I like Rhoda to Mary. I like, Falcon, Hit Girl. There's so many sidekicks that are just, I don't know, a staple with the superhero. It's kind of weird if they're not there, whether they have a big part or not.
So, Craig, what do you say to that? Jimmy Olsen as a necessary plot point, as a necessary character? Is that something that you keep going forward? Obviously, James Gunn thinks so. Because if we look at overall, I'm fine in a Robin-less Batman world. I'm totally fine with that.
My take is that Jimmy Olsen is always going to be a part of Superman, and I know James Gunn is a purist, is going to have a Superman. But to me, Jimmy Olsen has always been like the parsley in a four-course meal: steak, lobster, all the fixings, mashed potatoes, all that. And then after it's done, it's like, oh, there was parsley on there. Oh, okay. But if there wasn't there, I wouldn't have the meal wouldn't have been any less great. He's just a necessary. If he's not there, I'm fine with it. If he is there, I'm fine with it.
Do you think in the long run, will we see eventually the ghosting of Jimmy Olsen the way we saw, Robin, at least for now, being ghosted in the Batman movies? Are we going to shear off some characters? Because for me, you're talking pretty much the troika when you're dealing with Superman. You got, Perry White, you got your Lois Lane, and you got Superman. And then the villains, which are I think, more valid and valuable.
Yeah, I think it's always been like that, and I think it's always going to be like that. They started in 1940 with those 4 characters, so for him to be gone. But I think the biggest thing is what this Jimmy Olsen will do in James Gunn's movie will determine the direction of future Jimmy Olsens.
We'll see how it plays out. James Gunn, no dummy when it comes to creating great stuff, and he's shown a knack for getting the spirit of things right. So we look forward to that. All right, gurus, appreciate the information, and don't forget to subscribe and stay with us for content. We're going to keep it coming more often. So we appreciate the support. Spread the word, and we will see you next time. Bye-bye.